The queen who was afraid of water. The ambassador fainted from her scent. At court, this was called a sign of grace. Sounds absurd? Now imagine, you are as afraid of rain as you are of sin. Castile, 1491. The siege of Granada is coming to an end. It is winter. The palace is cold, even though the candles burn incessantly. Outside the windows, the night is thicker than incense. Inside the room, there is the smell of bodies, old wax, and prayer. This story has an educational purpose and is based on sources and later legends. We do not glorify suffering or physicality. We explain how faith, fear, and everyday life worked in that era. According to a later legend, Isabella allegedly confessed that she had only bathed twice, at birth and before marriage. There are no reliable primary sources to confirm this, but the story took on a life of its own. For the rest of her life, she cleansed herself in a different way, not with water, but with prayer. A copper bowl of holy water was always kept in her chambers. It stood by her bed like a guard, but the queen never touched it with her hands. The maids knew that if they wanted to please Isabella, they should not bring a towel, but a rosary. It is worth remembering that in the late Middle Ages, public baths still existed, and attitudes toward washing varied significantly from city to city, so anti-water was not a pan-European norm. Her confessor said, "Water opens the body to the devil. Purity is what is inside." And she believed it. She believed it so much that ordinary washing became a temptation, and dirt became a blessing. The camera moves through the corridors of the palace. Curtained windows, dim candlelight, bare footprints on the floor. The smell of incense mixes with the smell of sweat. It is not a stench, it is holiness, they say at court. Isabella touches the cross on her chest with her fingers. Her hands are dark with dust, but the cross shines. In her world, it is a sign of purity. Her vow is simple, not to wash until Granada falls. This is what is attributed to her in later accounts of the siege, more of an oral tradition than a recorded fact. Her fear is even simpler, that water will wash away not only dirt, but also grace. Dirt is grace, she repeats as the priest reads the psalm. For her, this is not a metaphor, but the truth. Because in an era when the body was considered a trap, the holiest thing one could do was to prevent it from existing. Now think about this. A woman who will be called the Catholic Queen, who will defeat the Moors and sign a decree opening up the New World, is afraid of what flows from the sky. For her, water is not a gift, but an enemy of holiness. But what happens when a body made of flesh begins to believe that sin is itself? The Castilian court is preparing to receive foreign ambassadors. The palace buzzes like a beehive, ladies polish silver, bakers sprinkle cinnamon, servants hang tapestries. Everything shines, except the queen herself. When the doors of the hall open, the air becomes thick, like smoke. One of the young ambassadors, they say, cannot bear it. He loses consciousness. He is carried out of the throne room. And Isabella only whispers, "The Holy Spirit is unbearable to the unclean." The paradox is that in Christian hagiographies the smell of holiness meant more of a floral honey aroma than a stench. But at court, fear of physicality prevailed over any theological nuance. Now the camera seems to take us back a few minutes. Isabella sits under a canopy, motionless, like an icon. The air around her is thick with incense, rosemary, and dried petals. She is brought a bottle of rare perfume, but she refuses it. "True purity does not need scents," she says quietly, but so that everyone can hear. The court ladies are silent. They know that scent is politics. One must smell expensive, decent, impeccable. But the more they hide their own bodies under fragrances, the more clearly the queen's own scent can be heard. Would you approach her, knowing that every breath could betray your disgust? It has been described in different ways. Some say, like wax and ashes. Others, like iron and sweat after fasting. But for Isabella, it was a sign of grace. A body that stinks does not betray the soul. She orders rosemary to be scattered around the throne too. purified the air with prayer. At that time, rue, mint, or petals were indeed scattered on the floor to mask odors and repel fleas. But even incense does not help. The air is heavy as sin and sweet as honey from wine. Her body smells of death, but for her, it is a sign of life. This is the smell of salvation, she tells her confessor. And in her eyes shines a fanatical certainty that is more frightening than any stench. On that day, Rome heard bells ringing, Paris signed agreements, and Spain prayed for peace. And in the palace of Castile, a woman believed that her smell was the language of God. And you? How would you recognize holiness? By the scent of incense or by the decay of flesh? Isabella wakes up before dawn every morning. Not to pray, but to do penance. She kneels by her bed, clutching her rosary, and whispers, "The body is dust. Dust is earth. Earth is God's." Her confessor, an old Franciscan, once told her, "It is not the body that serves God, but the spirit. Water washes the flesh, but it does not cleanse the soul." This echoed the extreme ascetic views of the time, not the general church doctrine. Since then, she has not allowed water to touch her body. There are 3 things in her room: a Bible, a cross, and a copper bowl with holy water. It shines, but it is always full. The servants change the water every morning, even though they know no one will touch it. A maid brings a clean sheet. Isabella stops her with a wave of her hand. "Don't touch it. It has absorbed my sins. Let it remain as proof of my struggle." Can you imagine such a struggle, against your own smell, against water, against yourself? This is no longer piety. It is a regime, day after day, without the right to warm water. She begins to keep a small diary, calling it Liber Puritatis, the Book of Purity. Scrolled the entries are short, like a breath. Day 47, no temptation of the flesh. No water. Day 82, the Lord tolerates my smell, that means he still needs me. Her body is withering, but her eyes are shining. She convinces herself that with each passing day she is getting closer to heaven because she is further away from the flesh. In the silence of the bedroom, only the ticking of the clock and the rustling of fabric can be heard. The air is saturated with smoke and sweat, heavy, like a promise that weighs on the chest. The servants swallow air so as not to suffocate, but they have no right to retreat. Isabella whispers, "My purity is in the dirt. Because I do not belong to the flesh. I belong to him." For her, this is not a metaphor, but a dogma. For those around her, it is madness. But in her world, there is no longer any place for the body. Only for the spirit, which has forgotten where the skin ends. Have you noticed how quickly holiness can become a form of addiction? The irony is that the queen who liberated Spain from the Moors has now locked herself in the prison of her own body. No swords, no chains, only prayers that smell of sweat. She calls it purification. We would call it decay. But is there a difference when faith and fanaticism smell the same? Night in the palace. The silence is so thick you can hear the candles burning. A maid enters the queen's chambers with a comb in her hands. Her movements are cautious, as if she is touching not hair, but holiness. Isabella sits motionless. Her face is pale, her neck scratched. She has not slept for several nights. Her body itches, her skin is covered with spots, her wounds do not heal. The doctors whisper about infection, but she hears only one word: trial. It's not a disease, Isabella tells her confessor. It's penance. When the maid combs her hair, tiny, whitish bodies fall out of the strands. The maid flinches, but Isabella stops her. Don't chase them away. They are God's creatures. They feed on my sin. Sounds wild, right? But at court, no one denied it. They were afraid to even think otherwise. In the palace, people begin to whisper that lice are angels of flesh. They say they are born from dirt, on their own, without seeds, like a miracle. The servants are frightened, but in the presence of the queen they repeat, "Yes, your majesty." It is a sign of God's presence. Isabella smiles. Her hands tremble as she touches her own skin, thin, red, scratched. There is dried blood on her fingers and a prayer on her lips. Pain is the language God speaks to me. She looks at herself in the mirror. Sunken eyes, dull hair, a wasted body. And suddenly she smiles, because she sees not herself, but a saint. Could you see holiness in a reflection that smells of death? Parasites, wounds, smell, everything becomes part of the cult. The body turns into an altar, and the stench, into proof of being chosen. Every drop of sweat is like holy water that does not need to be consecrated. At night you can hear it from afar. The whisper of prayer mixed with the quiet breath of pain. The servants stand behind the door and dare not enter. And she whispers, I have become a temple. And a temple must be filled with life. Even if that life crawls over me. Do you still remember how this faith began? This is how a new form of holiness is born, when the flesh is no longer the enemy, but the battlefield. And when victory means decay. For where is the line between miracle and decay, if both smell the same? The palace is filling with people again. Not out of love, but out of duty. For who would refuse to appear before a woman whom the church is already beginning to call blessed? Isabella sits on the throne. Her face is almost colorless, her hair braided into heavy plaits adorned with golden pins. The crown glitters, but the air is still, as if frozen. Ambassadors arrive with gifts, and courtiers barely hold their breath. The smell is so thick that it seems to have a shape. Some put clothes in their mouths so as not to faint. But no one dares to grimace. Would you admit that you find it difficult to breathe in front of the saint? For some of her contemporaries, her physical asceticism seemed like holiness. For others, it seemed like a policy of fear that smelled not of heaven, but of power. The Holy Spirit is unbearable to the unclean, she reminds us. She is no longer just a woman, she is a symbol. Her every breath is interpreted as a revelation, her every movement as a prophecy. And if her body stinks, it means it is the smell of holiness. She orders a diadem to be brought, heavy as sin. Put it on my head. The gold will hide the sin in my hair. The servant can barely bear the weight, and the stench. When the tiara is finally secured, Isabella stands up. There is a wound from the chain on her neck, and a smile of calm on her face. My crown is my cross, she says. The floor is covered with flowers to mask the smell. Servants scatter petals as if it were a carpet for the Virgin Mary. But even roses cannot mask the scent of decaying flesh. Isabella believes that this smell is her power. The courtyard is her weapon. Because fear is stronger than any law. No minister argues with her. Would you argue, knowing that every breath you take near her hurts? No priest dares to mention water. Because everyone who stands next to her feels that she is no longer of this world. She shines like gold and rots like a corpse, like Castile itself. Grand on the outside, decaying on the inside. Power and holiness are so intertwined that no one can distinguish the smell of power from the smell of sin. But how long can a kingdom that smells of death last? She orders the confessor to be brought to her. Not to the throne, but to her bed. He hesitates, but his fear of her, holiness, is stronger than his disgust. The room is stuffy. The candles go out one by one, as if even the flames do not want to be witnesses. Isabella's shadow trembles on the wall, the crown shines, but the body beneath it trembles as if in a fever. Father, she whispers, today I will not confess my soul. I want to confess my body. Are you ready to hear a confession that the church has never recorded? The priest lowers his eyes. He sees the wounds on her hands, the dried blood, the lice crawling on her wrists. Isabella raises her palm to the light. Look! God gave them to me so that I would not forget that I am made of flesh. If He made the world from clay, why should I be afraid to become earth? She laughs softly, almost affectionately. A fly flies away from her laughter and lands on the fresh herbs near the altar. The servants faint, but remain on their knees. Her scent is like a sermon that no one can bear, but everyone must listen to. It is He who speaks through me, says Isabella. It is his spirit in me that stinks, to remind us that holiness does not smell. Do you still think holiness is purity? She touches her chest, runs her finger over the scar, and leaves a red mark on her skin, like a blessing. Blood is my language. Pain is my psalm. Her voice weakens, but her confidence remains. The priest cries, and she whispers, almost tenderly, "Don't cry. When my body decays, God will take the spirit from it, and then only the smell of faith will remain from me." Silence. Only the rustle of fabric, heavy breathing, the last candle burning out. The camera slowly rises. The crown glitters in the darkness. And below, a body rotting in the name of salvation. And at this moment, it is already difficult to say whether it is prayer or decay. When Isabella died, the palace was silent. Not out of grief, but out of relief. Death entered quietly, like incense smoke, and took away what had long since ceased to belong to life. The body lay in the marble hall for 3 days. No one dared to approach it. The maids stood aside, covering their mouths with handkerchiefs. The air was thick and sweet, making one's head spin. But legends immediately began to appear. Some said that the body had not decayed and even had a sweet aroma of holiness. Others said that it was the usual smell of death. Thus, popular piety clashed with the experience of eyewitnesses. Would you believe in a miracle while standing next to a smell that makes it impossible to breathe? The courtiers whispered that after her death, the hall where the queen lay began to hallucinate. Some saw a figure in a misty dress. Others heard a rosary ringing in the darkness. But everyone remembered one thing: the smell. It lingered for weeks, penetrating the walls, the fabrics, the prayers. The people called her the saint who smells like God. Although even those who believed in her holiness could not say it without a hint of fear. In the crypt, next to her, they placed a chest. Inside it was an old copper bowl with holy water. It was dry and covered with dust, like the memory of a body that never dared to wash itself. Isabella became a symbol of an era that feared the body more than sin. At a time when the church painted paradise on the walls, people learned to be ashamed of their own flesh. Her death did not end this story, it only made it canon. Because when the body is called sin, faith becomes a kind of decay. She dreamed of becoming a saint, and she did. Not because of purity, but because of fear of it. Because in her world, the body was not a temple, but a prison. And the fire of her faith burned the key that could open the door. And us? Have we really come far from this? Or have we just learned to call the same fears by different names? We no longer crown fear, but we often confuse moral purity with physical purity. From detox cults to shame about body odor, we are still fighting not with dirt, but with ourselves. Isabella's story is a warning. When the body is declared an enemy, faith, any faith, becomes an instruction for self-destruction. The camera zooms out. The palace is enveloped in silence, bells ringing somewhere in the distance. Only in the air, amid the smoke and shadows, hangs a phrase that has haunted us through the centuries. Dirt is grace.